Welcome to Wizards of the Tower,
Role play.
and we're going to be talking about adult themes in RPGs. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Role play.
And we're not talking about badgers. We're talking about adult themes in RPGs today.
And what kind of got us going on this is there's a game we sort of want to start playing when we have a chance called Kids on Bikes.
Right.
Now, people play it differently, and I'm not going to jump on people for if they want to play it in a certain way. If everybody agrees, it's fine. But when I read through the book, it seemed to me like it took place in basically like adolescent kids.
Yeah.
You know,
As Tom and I grew up in a time frame that we relied heavily upon our bikes when we were in elementary school and junior high, and sometimes even up into high school.
Yeah.
We relied upon our bikes to get around.
Yeah, I'm thinking, the perfect game period that this would be appropriate to would be like age 11 or 12 up to about age 15.
Yeah.
And right in there in that time period, pre-driver's license, pre-car, but post-big wheels. Kind of like that,
Even though the game does allow for you to play teenagers and adults.
Sure, but then again,
to me, then it's not really kids on bikes.
It's not really kids on bikes. Okay, but then we started thinking about adult themes. And a lot of this came up because we've been watching some adult players of Kids on Bikes
playing the game, trying to get an idea of how the flow of it goes. Being the referee for it, or game master, whatever you want to call it.
And I was astounded by how they were playing the game because they were chock full of adult themes in a game that basically is for kids, like innocent kids, exploring the haunted funeral home, not buying drugs.
As probably one of the key things about Kids on Bikes is it's really kind of based upon Goonies and E.T. and Monster Squad and
something like that.
A lot of those shows and movies that were about adolescent kids having adventures.
Yeah. Now it's easy for Delaney and I to imagine this because we grew up in the 80s. The late 70s, early 80s. So we grew up in that time period before computers, before cell phones, before...
tail into baby boomer and start of Gen X.
And our bikes were everything. And our towns were still... The way our towns were still set up is you could spend all day riding your bike around and no one ever had to worry that you would ever have a problem.
You could ride from one end of town to the other.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't have the kind of problems that you have today, the rampant drug abuse, the rampant violence, the problems. The child molestations, everything like that was always, it was very contained, it was very limited. And so that's when we talk about, are adult themes appropriate for RPGs? Well, a mature group could create an adult RPG that dealt with adult themes.
Right.
Okay? And I'm not saying you can't do that, but as long as everybody's on the table with what's going on.
Right. It has to be agreed upon by everybody when you come into the game.
Yeah. I mean, because
you don't want to alienate somebody who's not comfortable with it. Maybe they've had experiences in their life that really upsets them, makes them very uncomfortable.
Yeah, maybe you're pushing all the wrong buttons for people. And so there are, certain adult type games where a lot of this stuff is apparent. And when we talk about adult themes, we talk about things such as drug use, sex, murder, assassination, torture, rape, incest,
abuse.
Types of abuse, stuff that really gets you the R rating on into the R plus rating.
And possibly even into X.
Yeah, and maybe even into the X rating. Already into that, you know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff on TV and on cable that people see that really pushes the boundaries of that sort of thing. And it's definitely adult themed. Now, when is that appropriate? Well, there are a lot of RPGs out there that deal with some serious adult things.
Yeah.
A lot of horror, a lot of violence, a lot of gore, a lot of exploitation, abuse, torture. I mean, anybody who's ever played Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
In computer RPGs.
And in computer RPGs, and I'm suppose we've talked about playing the Fallout RPG game, but we've never really got to it. But you can talk about that in the abuse and the violence that happens in those games. Now, with a caveat, we play Pathfinder. We play D&D. There's a lot of fighting in D&D, a lot of fighting in
pirate board.
Yeah, in pirate games and stuff. Now, it's always agreed upon to the people who play those games that there's going to be violence in the game. But we draw the line at a lot of stuff. We draw the line at torture. We draw the line at rape. We draw the line at a lot of stuff like that. And the reason being is because you don't want to push buttons for people. You don't want to make them uncomfortable in a role-playing game when they're supposed to be having fun with escapism.
Yeah, and when we talk drugs, we're not talking like fentanyl and coke and things like that. That also does include alcohol.
Yeah.
Because alcohol is a form of a drug.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of times in our RPGs, we all go into the tavern and we have an ale or have a mead or have some wine or whatever, and we all have laughed. Hey, I'm getting drunk. Am I getting drunk yet?
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Are there any girls in the bar?
Yeah. I want to do them. Yeah, that's from a popular video that people who play our D&D know about.
Right.
When is it appropriate for these themes to crop up? Well, I don't know. It has to be agreed upon, like we said.
Yeah. I, as a player, if I'm going into a game and knowing that, if I knew that there were these things going on, and I'm an adult, I don't know how much I want to be around it. If I did sex in my game, it's a cutscene. It's like you guys go off together and it's a cutscene. That's it. And we've had that in a game where we've had a player and an NPC, and it was all cutscene. It's like, okay, we all knew that they were together, and it was all, end of scene, and you imagine what you want happened, and
we've had that, but it's been appropriate to the flow of the story. It's been in context with the story. It hasn't been taken out of context for entertainment purposes.
Right.
So the only time we've had that sort of sexual sort of relation is always about in context of the story. Someone is creating an heir like a child, an heir to the throne. Someone is doing something along the way of creating magic or something of the sort. It's been part of the story. It wasn't thrown in for entertainment value.
No, and it wasn't involving everybody. It was just between,
Yeah.
But everyone understood it was between those two, and it just kind of screened out.
Yeah. Now, if you're going to present adult themes in an RPG, how do you present them? Do you make it graphic? Do you make it just implied? Do you make it to the point where people become uncomfortable? And what happens when people become uncomfortable? Should they let everybody know, hey, I'm not liking this? They
give you a signal, hey, time out.
It's like, wait a minute, this is getting too far. Maybe you should just do this as a private conversation with the player so that I don't have to...
out of game or whatever.
Game, yeah. So that you're not having these things crop up. And I'm completely for that. I think that, if it's going to be in the game, do it to the point where it doesn't make people uncomfortable, truly.
Yeah. Because we don't know what could trigger somebody. Maybe they were abused, and that could be off-putting.
Yeah, in the political environment we have today, you just never know how people are going to feel about certain things that happen in the game. So it's always good, in my opinion, to be sensitive to a certain level, because you can get way overly sensitive, with certain types of people. But you should be sensitive to a certain point to where, all people's, their interactions are taken into account.
Yeah. when is it really appropriate to really do these things, if it's even really appropriate?
Yeah. Now, Delaney and I brought this up. It's like you have two different kinds of games, broadly speaking. You have end-of-world zombie apocalypse games where just basically anything is on the map. Cannibalism, drug use, theft, murder, anything you're trying to survive. You're bopping cannibals left and right. You're stealing. You're backstabbing. You're whatever. You're doing anything to survive.
Yep.
Those kind of games are popular. People play them a lot. They do anything they do in order to get ahead, to survive.
Yeah, in those kind of games, it's a PvP type game on a computer game.
Yeah.
But as on an RPG.
Well, you could play it that way.
Yeah.
But you've always got to be careful that people understand that you're in the game and that your behavior doesn't come out of the game. Some people aren't sophisticated enough to leave their behavior at the table. They carry it on out of the game for some reason. They're into method acting, and the way they role play, they're into method role play, I guess you could say. So when they leave the table, they're just as abusive as when they were playing.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
You have that kind of a game system, but then you also have something like Kids on Bikes.
Yeah, and Kids on Bikes. I'm reading through the rules, and having watched some of these groups play, and I'm like, wow, I don't personally think I would want to play with that kind of a group.
Yeah.
Whether it's the players or the themes, and it's something that's kind of got to be agreed upon, but I think it's also the responsibility of the referee or the game master.
Yeah.
Because maybe they're not comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And maybe you'd want to find somebody else if that's what you want in your game. I imagine when I play Kids on Bikes, it's going to be like the late 70s, early 80s, that we're talking 11, 12, 13-year-old kids.
Yeah.
Who are, you're in junior high, maybe just starting into junior high, maybe even 6th grade.
Yeah.
And you're getting around in a bike. And it's, to me, I look at it as kind of like a Scooby-Doo with younger kids. And like I said, Goonies. Goonies is a great movie. It's one of my favorite. And having visited the story and visited the sites and love Goonies.
Yeah.
And then E.T. E.T. was a big movie growing up for us.
Absolutely.
Stand By Me,
Yes.
and the whole thing about there was, hey, let's go see the dead body, and it's adventure of these 4 young boys to go see this dead body and growing together, and the pains that they have, or the abuse that they have in their family, or in life, and how they feel, and while those have some adult themes to them, it wasn't to the point of being really bad. You're going to have, even in a Kids on Bike, you may have a kid who's, maybe their parents are not there.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're a little bit abusive. But, do you have to really get into that? Maybe it as a kid, maybe the player says, yeah, my dad abuses me and things like that. But you don't get into the real heavy of it. It's not necessary.
It could be within a very peripheral context of the storyline, but it doesn't have to be, part of the story unless everybody wants to make it part of the story.
Yeah.
Now, I remember when I was a kid that, I came from basically a middle class family. And Delaney and I were talking about, getting our bikes and playing and having fun and what kind of bikes we had and stuff.
Yeah. And I came from a very lower class family.
Yeah, my parents, worked hard. They were together. I had a 2-parent family. I had a decent house, so I was pretty lucky. But a lot of my friends didn't have that, and I remember being very conscious of things that I could say and things that I didn't want to say. So I didn't want to upset my friends by saying, "Oh, we have this and this at my house. You don't have it at yours." And so I was always very conscious of that. And I think kids are very sensitive to that relationship because they want to have friends. They want to have these friends in their lives. But you can't always, not everybody has an easy path in life. Not everybody has a sort of a life that they live.
Yeah.
So you've got to be conscious of that. And that's kind of how I see the relationship of groups with Kids on Bikes, is that they're all friends. They all get together. Everybody's different, but they're all friends, and they get together for a common purpose and to have fun. Yet they're all different, and they all kind of look at each other's differences not as, handicaps, but as just part of a person's character or context.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I came from a very lower class family. My father was never around. My mom was working 2 jobs. A lot of times she was working 2 jobs, and we were home alone trying to feed ourselves. We'd go, maybe mom would give us a few extra bucks and go up to the Pizza Hut, and we'd share a pizza together.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't much, and that was a rarity.
Yeah.
Because we had a Pizza Hut that was just right through we lived at this house that had a big, huge apple orchard that we'd go play in. That was the funnest times I can remember. We'd have that apple orchard. It was 10 acres of apples in this house that we rented. And we'd go out there and, we had forts, and we'd play pirates, and we'd play army, and we'd play, we had a ditch, and we'd go sledding in the hill back behind us. And, that was our adventures. And go riding the bike to the candy shop, the little grocery store in the middle of town. And
yeah. I mean, Delaney and I are also talking about what sort of movies or stories sort of pushed the edge of that innocence into something that was different. And Stand By Me is a good one.
Yeah.
But we also talked about the movie Quicksilver, which where the kid was handicapped, and his uncle, played by Gary Busey, made him a little, like the silver, was it Quicksilver?
It was Quicksilver, yeah. It's a Stephen King movie based upon a werewolf, and the kid was handicakked.
And the kid was and he had
the preacher in town is the werewolf.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers, sorry. But the kid had like a motorized bike, like a trike that he rode around on. That was his way of getting around. It was motorized. It had a little gas engine, and he rode around on it. And I think they called it Quicksilver, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So, but yet it also has the theme of the werewolf. And it's a very dangerous kind of werewolf kind of a situation. And there were some scary parts in that.
Yeah.
But it was also mainly for kids. It was kids' entertainment. And they could handle the werewolf stuff as long as it didn't get too scary. So that's kind of the outer edge of towards an adult theme, but still grounded well within what you can get away with having the kids in the story and have it being kid-centered. Okay? That's how you get the kids on bikes situation there. And so, in my opinion, if you're going to play the game, play it correctly within the context. If you're going to start introducing adult themes, be very careful how you do that. But if you're going to make an adult storyline, like we were listening to one where they were going out to buy drugs, and I'm like, what?
The referee and the player were fantastic.
Yeah.
But to me, it was actually kind of cringeworthy.
Yeah,
watching this, I was like, oh my God.
It was pretty dang cringeworthy.
I couldn't. I personally would not want to be part of that game because of just what it was about. Hey, you doing drugs? Hey, let's go do drugs, man. You buying those drugs? Yeah. Can we do some?
Yeah. It just, to me, it's like, okay, this just moved out of kids on bikes to kids in cars getting into trouble. So
delinquents in cars.
Yeah, delinquents in cars. You're not trying to solve the mystery of the haunted funeral home here. You're trying to score some weeds so that you can go out and tear the town up. If you want to have an RPG like that, fine, but let's just make sure that everybody's on board with that.
Yeah, so adult themes in your RPGs.
We'd love to hear what everybody thinks. I know this could be pretty controversial.
Yeah.
Okay, but just keep in mind that, this channel is about our opinions, about how we present, our beliefs and our opinions about RPGs, gaming, and that sort of thing. So we'd love to hear what you have to say about it, too.
Yeah, so anyway, we're going to end this episode of Adult Themes and RPGs and Kids on Bikes.
Wizards of the Tower, actually.
Wizards of the Tower.
Yeah.
We hope you like, share, subscribe, spread the word, ring the bell, pet the badger.
Pet the badger.
Badgers and burrows.
Yep.
And leave us a comment. We'll reply back to your comment. If you have an idea for an episode, please let us know, either in the replies or on Discord or email us or however, but let us know. We'll be happy to talk about some other things besides what we come up with.
Yeah.
We sometimes struggle about coming up with what we want to do. So sometimes it's a little bit of a delay.
It is, but
anyway, we hope all your adventures are epic.
And keep on rolling.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Okay, that's our 3.
Welcome to Badgers in the hole.
No.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the RPG Badgers and Worms. No.
You can't see him because of this. Let's put this somewhere. Okay.